Just those of you who are prompt, we're going to wait a couple more minutes because people are straggling. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Since we are a small group, everybody should come up to the front. You don't have to be bashful.
How close?
Just as close as you can stand.
Or you can stand us.
Well, kudos for those of you who did brave the elements. I'm Bob Hathaway. I direct the Asia program here. We are delighted and grateful that you made the effort to come because we have a particularly interesting topic. Our speaker, who is a visiting scholar here and whom I will introduce more broadly in a minute, is here working on a topic having to do with Bangladesh's political history. And so when we, as we always do at the end of our scholar's stay here, we began talking with him about his public event. I just assumed he would be wanting to do something relating to his the research he's doing there. And lo and behold, he said, no, I'd like to do something differently. And so different is what we're doing today. And so you do get an extra bonus for coming. We're going to talk today about an apparent contradiction. Landslide elections, where one side gets an overwhelming majority of the vote, and of course, which are their fondest desire of all politicians, whether they're from United States or South Asia or anywhere where democratic politics are practiced, landslide elections can sometime have unforeseen consequences. Worse yet, they can sometimes set in motion developments that fundamentally alter the political system in the country and not necessarily for the good. Hence the contradiction. Politicians want to be elected in a landslide manner, and yet with some frequency, these landslide elections don't turn out very well. The United States is not unfamiliar with the concept of landslide elections. Perhaps the most famous took place in 1972 when Richard Nixon won 49 states, 520 electoral votes, and then within 2 years was forced from office. Not all landslide elections turn out that badly. Ronald Reagan was reelected in 1984, and with even more electoral votes, with 525 electoral votes. He did not meet Richard Nixon's unfortunate end, though. We're going to talk about landslide elections in South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Our speaker is Ali Riaz, who has been a public policy scholar here at the Wilson Center this fall. Unfortunately, he's leaving us next week to go back to his day job, where he teaches in the Department of Politics and Government at Illinois State University. Ali, you, in the few months you've been here, you've been a good colleague, an impressive scholar. You have been all over the media, perhaps even more so than you had anticipated, but we have greatly enjoyed having you here, and we will hate to see you leave when you leave next week. Ali Riaz is considered one of the senior scholars, the top scholars in the United States on Bangladesh. He focuses on Bangladeshi politics and government for the most part. Prior to becoming a professor, he was a journalist, broadcast journalist with the BBC World Service in London. Ali, we will turn things over to you now, and since we are small, we'll do this very informally, and go ahead, it's yours.
Thank you both for generous introduction, and thank you all for coming. I know it's the worst possible weather that you can anticipate, but I do enjoy your company. So let's talk about elections. Mostly I'm talking about South Asian elections over the last 4 decades. Usually, as you can understand, elections in South Asia is sort of a festival. It's not only a matter of, citizens' right. These are seen as occasions where we have seen festivities and all sorts of things. Whether you are in India or Pakistan, Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, this has been the common one. Some of the pictures that I put it up shows that there is a huge participation insofar as the participation is concerned. But of course, election is part of democracy. And we definitely, it is cliche to say that there is no universal definition for democracy. We simply cannot say this is how the democracy looks like, because it varies. It varies over time. It varies over where you are talking about, at what point. However, election seems to be an integral part of it, that in some ways there should be popular representation. So far, we haven't seen anything that can replace election. However, election is not the only thing that is democracy. That part we know, all of us, that when we are talking about election, at one point in the 1980s, even until 1980s, let me put it this way, that we have privileged election as the democracy, what has been termed the fallacy of electoralism, that we talked about too much about election, as if election itself would take care of it. Given the transformation from or transition from authoritarian government were taking place in Latin America, parts of Africa, parts of Asia, a lot of people were talking about elections, whether elections is, as if election itself would take us there. But over time, it became clear that election itself, though an integral part, doesn't actually is all about democracy. That means election itself is not a guarantee of democracy. So at that point, we can see that there are two kinds or two ideas of democracy emerged. What would we call as a formal or procedural democracy, where elections take place, democratic institutions exist, but those are abused or managed by a small group of people. That means, those who are elected or elected through manipulation, they pursue a very narrow interest. On the other hand, people have talked about substantive democracy, democracy that actually involves a larger electorate, that involves a larger population, and in many ways include them in various ways. A rule of law is established, and representation is not only seen once in a 5 years election kind of thing. So there are two ideas that emerge that, okay, election is important, but election does not by itself creates democracy. Now, in terms of the election, there are huge voter participation in South Asia. Unlike any other region, perhaps, that we have seen that, generally speaking, South Asian population are interested in election, meaning they participate. Looking at the last elections that took place in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. In case of Bangladesh, the last election in 2008, participation was as high as 85%, which is unusual. But this is not unusual in the context of Bangladesh, because over the last decades, we have seen that the number of participation is going up. Similarly, in case of India, it was about 58%. In case of Pakistan, 55%. In case of Sri Lanka, in the 2010 election, it is 61%. So you can say, okay, South Asians like election. They do participate in election. But what is interesting is in their perception, election is not exactly the only attributes of democracy. As a matter of fact, they think that this is little to do with election. The 2004-2005 election, 2004-2005 survey that was conducted in South Asia, close to 20,000 people, over 20,000 people over a period of August 2004 to February 2005, what we have seen, when they were asked about the attributes of democracy, election came to be 12% only. Freedom, or for that matter, justice and welfare seems to be high on the agenda. They see those are major attributes rather than an election. So here an interesting thing that you can see, on the one hand, there is a huge participation, but on the other hand, they do not see election as the key attribute of democracy. What does that mean? In many ways, that sees that democracy in the mind of the people, and South Asians in general, they think that democracy has more to offer. Whether that is being offered is a different issue, but they do think that is it. That's why that leads to some of the people, not only in case of South Asia, and particularly we can bring it to South Asia, that the presence of functioning electoral system does not automatically ensure the existence of true democracy or rule out the possibility of authoritarian structures. And that is what I'm going to insist on, that there are situations where the election system can contribute to the rise of what I call populist authoritarianism. When exactly that happens? It's a two-thirds majority. When there is a two-thirds majority of the ruling party or coalition in legislature, that is when we see the rise of populist authoritarianism. How many times South Asia have seen that one? Over the last 4 decades, if you look closely, there were 35 elections in South Asia. Bangladesh had 9 elections, India had 11 elections, Pakistan had 8, and Sri Lanka had 7 elections. Out of those 35 elections, if you plot them, they should look like this. Over the period, and there's a handout, if you please pick it up, you'll see that these are the elections that we are talking about, these 35 elections that took place over the 4 decades. But also what you need to look into is those which are above this red line that I have created. Those which has created more than 66% of the seats, parliamentary seats. And in case of South Asia, most of them are the parliamentary elections that we are looking into, given that they are parliamentary, they have this parliamentary system of government. So if you look at this chart, what you see is that despite these 35 elections, there are few which actually created two-third majorities. And those are the ones that we have seen here. What are those years that we are looking into? What I call the supermajority. Where these supermajority were created, in which elections? In case of Bangladesh, you can see that 6 elections out of 9 elections have created the supermajority. In case of India, there are 2 occasions that we have seen it. In case of Pakistan, there are 2. In case of Sri Lanka, 1. Now, in case of Bangladesh, there need to be a caveat when we are talking about supermajority or two-thirds majority. 79, 88, and 96. These are the 3 elections that I have marked. Why? Because 79 through 88, these are the 2 elections that took place under military regimes. And in many instances, beyond South Asia, military regimes use elections to legitimize their actions, and elections are manipulated in many respects. And in this case, in case of Bangladesh, it was clearly that the military regimes try to use or manipulated elections in many ways, as many ways possible, to ensure their majority. And in doing so, in many instances, the opposition political parties didn't participate. For example, 1988, the election was not participated by any opposition political parties. That automatically led into this kind of situation. In case of 1996, Bangladesh had 2 elections, but one that is I'm referring to is the one took place in February, where no opposition political parties participated. That parliament had a very short life, only for less than a month or so. But nevertheless, with a single party, that is what we have seen, that they captured 100%. Now, what happened to these elections? When I'm saying this is the curse, what happened to these elections when there are supermajority? My general argument, irrespective of the countries, we have seen that these elections create a situation where practically a populist authoritarianism rises. In case of Bangladesh, 1973, Awami League was in power. That was the first election. And within 2 years of that election, we saw the amendment of Bangladesh Constitution, which is called 4th Amendment of the Constitution, which led to the establishment of one-party system. Not only that they have used the supermajority for extending the life of the parliament, the tenure, but they also created a one-party system. And that led to, in some ways, paved the way, if not led to, the military coup d'etat in August 1975 and instability in politics until November, which in many ways has been extended to 1977. In general, we can say in case of Bangladesh, the 1975 one-party system and subsequent military rule continued the instability in Bangladesh politics until 1990. In the meantime, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party emerged under the patronage of then military ruler Ziaur Rahman. And in 1979, when they captured the two-third majority, they made another amendment of the constitution which legitimized all military actions. All actions under the military rule were legitimized in 1979. Anything that took place between 1975 and 1979, everything was legitimized under that constitutional amendment. What happened? It changed the state principles. It paved the way for the religion-based parties, to re-entry of the religion-based parties, and practically shaped Bangladeshi politics to a great extent since then. You can say there is a positive side to it. They also introduced multi-party system, but overall implication of the Fifth Amendment was that it practically changed the nature of Bangladeshi state. Then comes 1988. By then, there is another military ruler who came in Jatiya Party, it was created another party, and they introduced and approved the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution, which allowed state religion. Islam was declared as a state religion. In 1996, by then, the military rule has came to an end, and in 1991, there was an election, there was a civilian rule, and the 1991 election was considered as one of the fair elections until then. But in 1996, when all opposition parties were demanding for a caretaker government, the ruling Bangladesh Nationalist Party went ahead and had a unilateral election, non-inclusive election, led to a parliament which finally amended the constitution to introduce the 13th Amendment. On the one hand, the 13th Amendment created a caretaker system, but on the other hand, this caretaker system, as I have argued previously in many instances, was not something that Bangladeshis had a conversation about. It was done in a haste and subsequently created a problem which we are still seeing in case of Bangladesh. Then comes 2001. BNP was elected through a very fair election. But what happened? They got the two-thirds majority and used it to manipulate their constitution. They introduced the 14th Amendment, and which practically put a control over who is going to be the head of the caretaker government. So, meaning practically they are trying to manipulate the next election. This led to a serious instability, and eventually in 2006, BNP's tenure was over. Bangladesh entered into a 2 years military-backed caretaker government. Then came 2008 election. Awami League won the election, not only two-thirds majority, 3/4 of the majority, which led to another constitutional amendment. Each and every time in case of Bangladesh, what we have seen, with two-thirds majority, the politicians have manipulated the constitution as much they could. What happened to India? Similarly, in case of India, we have seen two instances. In 1971, that led to the 24th Amendment, and Indian National Congress tried making the parliament powerful to amend the constitution. There was a battle with the court. Court said you cannot do that one. They tried to impose emergency and make some other changes. Court said, no, you cannot do that one because constitution doesn't allow you to do so. They changed the constitution so that they can do it. In the history of India, that's the only time we have seen an emergency was declared. This was possible because a two-thirds majority of the Indian National Congress. The second instance in 1984, where we have seen this massive scandal, which has not gone away, still as we speak. This is a scandal which was, again, Indian National Congress was in power, and what they used, they basically, that gave them this kind of a feeling that they can do anything. And Rajiv Gandhi was in power, and we have seen this Bofors scandal. What is the Bofors scandal? There's a kickback issue, and a Swedish arms company provided, according to them, or at least various sources, the kickbacks were used by Indian National Congress. In case of Pakistan, there are two instances, 1977 and 1997. In 1977, Pakistan People's Party came to power, and it led to a massive scale of demonstration by the opposition. And subsequently, though there were attempts to compromise, but by then the train has left the station, meaning that what gave Pakistan's People's Party enormous power that have been abused by the ruling class, and that paved the way for the military rule in 1979. In case of 1997, the Muslim League, though had one seat short, but when they came into power, they made some changes, and again it is the 14th Amendment, anti-defection clause, effectively prevented Prime Minister from being Dismissed because with the 13th Amendment, they took away the power from the president. That's the good part, perhaps. But at the same time, with the anti-defection, practically Prime Minister had enormous power and had very little checks and balance. Eventually, it led to a conflict with the court. And so much so that at one point, the ruling party loyalists stormed the court, Supreme Court. What prompted them is basically this power of enormous power that gives them an aura that they are invincible. Sri Lanka, 1977, the election that took place that gave UNP two-third majority. Immediately they amended the constitution. One thing they introduced is instead of first past the post system, they introduced proportional representation, but they also created the executive presidency. Enormously powerful presidency was created through 1978 constitution. And what is interesting is, I don't know how these things happen, it is the 14th Amendment. You know, everywhere this 14th, the Pakistan had this 14th Amendment, and the Sri Lanka. In 1982, this parliament extended its own tenure. They could do it because they had this two-third majority. It removed the first past the post system, but they already extended their life and created an enormously powerful executive presidency. So in all cases that over the last 4 decades, at any point, whenever there is a two-third majority of seats, and please note that we are talking about the number of seats, because that is what matters in case of parliamentary system. This is what resulted. Now you can say, okay, if the electors want it, why not? No, electors never wanted it, as a matter of fact. In case of Bangladesh, even if we take out 79, 88, and 96, because these are in many ways manipulated election. In fair election in 1973, to some extent fair, but not necessarily absolutely fair, even if we take 2001 and 2008, popular votes were for the ruling party / coalition was 46% and 57%, not 66%. Not that two-thirds of the majority was asking for a two-thirds support or two-thirds seats in the parliament. There's a clear discrepancy between these two. What about India? Same thing. In 71, only 43.68% of popular votes were secured by Indian National Congress. In case of 84, 49%, less than 50% of the popular vote led them to this kind of situation. Yet they secured 66% and above, and they used it. Pakistan, in case of 77, it is 60%. In case of 97, it is 45.9. Sri Lanka, 50%. So electorate actually never wanted that there should be a 66% of the seats going to one coalition or other. So what are the lessons here? What I am trying to argue? What I'm trying to argue is this: in case of South Asian elections, in fair elections, South Asian electors didn't vote for a parliament with a party or a coalition occupying for two-thirds of seats. First past the post system created a situation wherein we have seen that ruling party or coalition have secured, and in almost all instances, they have abused it to manipulate the constitution. In all instances, the ruling party, with their supermajority, have manipulated without expressed mandate from their citizens. None of the South Asian countries, the electorate, have given any mandate to any political party. With only one exception, you can say, is 1973 Bangladesh. Otherwise, none of these political parties ever secured 66% or above popular votes to make those changes. First past the post system has created this one, supermajority. But proportional representation is not exactly a check to this, because the 2010 elections in Sri Lanka has almost given this kind of situation. Almost, not there, but it has created that kind of situation. And we are seeing how that is being used. Is still making, say for example, they have changed so that the president's tenure, the term limit has now gone in case of Sri Lanka. Among the South Asian countries, Bangladesh experienced it more than any other countries. Unfortunately, it is heading for another one. If the current election goes forward on 5th of January, definitely it is going to create a two-thirds majority of a coalition. Practically, it would be handful of political parties which ideologically are aligned, they're partner in a coalition that would create another kind of situation, another similar kind of situation. So what is the solution? In some ways, there should be constitutional proviso that needs to be created in order to check these kind of things. Perhaps referendum is one way, that unless two-thirds support is secured through a referendum, no constitutional changes. Practically, the fundamental changes of constitution should not be approved by only two-thirds majority of seats in the parliament, because that is inconsistent with the popular mandate. Otherwise, what we are witnessing in case of South Asia, it is not helping democracy in general, particularly in those countries which are trying to move and create institutions for democracy. As we move forward, perhaps this is something that needs to be understood or at least discussed overall. That is what I want to put it on the table for discussion. And let me conclude by thanking Bob for your generous introduction, and thanks to Wilson Center for hosting me for a few months. It was a wonderful experience for me. Ambassador Milan, thank you. I really appreciate your support. We knew each other for a long time, but being here gave me the opportunity to work with you. Michael Kugelman was very supportive. Of course, without Lindsay Collins, I don't think anyone can actually survive in Wilson Center. At least I wouldn't have. And Alex, my intern who worked with me for the last 3 years, it was good to have you with me. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. Really very provocative. Let me press you before I turn to those in the audience. Other democracies in other regions of the world also use first past the post. And indeed, unless I totally misunderstood the concept, we do in this country. Are you arguing that first past the post has the potential for creating these unforeseen consequences or consequences unwanted by the electorate elsewhere as well because of first past the post? If that's your argument, can you point to
Political culture. However, so long the system is there, so long the system is allowing this to happen, it is very difficult to change the culture without changing the system. That's why what I am suggesting, if there is some checks within the system, that might help building the democratic institutions. Otherwise, continuation of this, particularly in places like Bangladesh, where we have seen it is happening repeatedly, that becomes an incentive in some ways for the political parties to continue. But that does not represent the mandate. It doesn't represent the expressed mandates of the electorate. That's why I'm trying to underscore the specifics of the South Asia, but not necessarily, I'm not suggesting that the South Asia is unique. There are other places, but more so in South Asia, and there's South Asian system. That's why it requires more attention, if not anything else.
Questions from the audience, comments, reaction? Carl?
It's a, thank you for the presentation. I've never thought of it this way. Now that, it's very thought-provoking. But I must say, I'm not fully convinced yet. One of the reasons is that I would want to see evidence that the behavior you are talking about, the amendment, attempts to try and amend the Constitution in such a way as to regain power, or to sort of create undemocratic access to power using democratic means, that this is not the consequence of something other than the majority in Parliament. And you can take the example of 77, the elections in India and Pakistan in the 70s. We know that third world populism of the 1970s variety came to grief almost everywhere. And almost everywhere, these populist leaders, when the internal contradictions of what they were trying to do, when they hit the limits of what they were trying to do, use the state to try and turn it into a job-creating engine and whatnot. When that ran into its own internal limits, they did everything they could in their power to try and hold on to power. And in many cases, they, in the case of Bhutto in Pakistan, he did the election to the point where he landed up with an unrealistic majority, where everyone, that itself was proof of the fact that they were reached. In the case of Indira Gandhi, she invoked an emergency. But if one looks elsewhere as well, in other parts of the third world, you see these third world populist leaders getting more and more desperate. So I would want to know that in your example from the 70s, for instance, to what extent do we attribute the behavior of Indira Gandhi and the imposition of the emergency and the behavior of Bhutto in 77 to the fact that they had supermajorities on the one hand, and that created too much power, and then that power was used to try. Or to what extent was it the fact that they had this control of the state, but they weren't really able to translate that into governing the country? The country was not responding to the power. Number two, your inclusion of 1984 on the list. I'm not fully convinced that the Bofors scandal should be placed. I agree that it's a big crime anytime you have misappropriation of funds on that level. It's obviously a bad thing and needs to be condemned. But when you place that on the list next to the other great crimes you're talking about, and there are some very big crimes, the abrogation of democracy is a very big crime. When you place the Bofors scandal on the same scale as two-thirds majority, somebody who's got control through the legislature of the state, but somehow is not able to translate that control of the state into actual governance results. I mean, the army was launching a military action in India without even consulting the civilian prime minister. And he's like, well, what about my two-thirds majority in parliament? And it's that sort of civil-military situation that has been such a feature of Pakistan's politics that had a big role to play in eventually bringing it down and eventually forcing Nawaz Sharif to resort to extraordinary measures to try and hold on to its power in the face of an extraordinary challenge he was getting from the military. So I'm not sure if the two-thirds majority explains why he behaved the way he did. But the fact that with the majority, he believed that he has power over the state, he should control the state, and there are elements in the state that are not responding to his initiative and his direction. And as a result, it creates the imbalance. So in which case, it's not exactly the majority. It's something other than the majority that is creating the sort of extraordinary prerogative that you are saying is the curse of the two-thirds. I was also curious to know, the last government in Pakistan has amended the constitution in very fundamental ways, but in the direction opposite to, claiming a massive prerogative. They've in fact disempowered the federation and devolved power down to the provinces. And that's been done in consultation with other parties in parliament, and has brought about an unprecedented sort of weakening of the federation in favor of the provinces. People are saying that had something like this been done back in 1960s, possibly the tragic breakup and all the sort of associated elements could have been that was the essential demand at that time, to recognize that fundamental flaw in the Constitution has been recognized. I'm curious to know how you might be doing that, in light of, your work as
Okay, let me take one at a time. The populist authoritarianism or populism that you are referring to the 1970s, we have seen that one in South Asia. If you look closely, at the same time, the rise of Indira Gandhi in power, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in case of Pakistan. And it has, beyond South Asia, there are. But those were institutionalized in many ways because of this two-third majority. That's my argument. And absolutely, here, with this two-third majority, they were trying to make changes, which you argued that they were trying to deliver and they couldn't deliver. And that's why they thought they should use this power of two-third majority to make or advance their agenda, to put it mildly. But that, in a sense, that's an argument, I understand. And Aisha Jalal has made that argument in her book on authoritarianism and democracy to a certain extent. However, if you look at their behavior beyond that, in repression of the opposition, of pursuing on some of those things which you